Hundreds of ancient cultures tell the same terrifying story. A great deluge once reshaped the world, a memory echoing from Mesopotamia to the Americas. We find the command to build a boat and seek life in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a plea from the edge of oblivion. This is not merely myth, it is a profound geological puzzle etched into our collective past. Your view of human history will be permanently changed as we uncover the tangible clues behind these global flood memories. We will journey to the depths of the Black Sea and scale the peaks of the Andes, searching for evidence that bridges science and legend. We will ask if a single catastrophic event inspired these stories, or if our ancestors faced a planet in constant hydraulic turmoil. What does it mean when legends from opposite ends of the earth whisper the same secret? The voice of the flood echoes from every corner of our world. In the vast deserts of Australia, Aboriginal elders speak of the Dreamtime deluge that shaped the rivers and valleys, a story of creation born from destruction. Far across the globe, the Hopi people of the American Southwest preserve their own account of a world purified by water, with only a small group of virtuous survivors left to repopulate the earth. These are not isolated tales. Over 500 distinct cultures, from the rainforests of the Amazon to the remote islands of the Pacific, share a strikingly similar story of a catastrophic global flood. This is a universal human inheritance, a memory so deeply ingrained it seems to be part of our very foundation. But why this event? Why does this specific catastrophe, above all others, form a cornerstone of our collective mythology? Folklorist Dr. Amelia Reed suggests the answer lies in the stunning consistency of the core narrative. Across continents and millennia, we hear the same core elements repeated. A divine warning ignored by the masses, the construction of a saving vessel, an ark or a great canoe, the survival of a single righteous family or a small group of people. And finally, a world reborn from the waters, offering humanity a second chance. This is not the pattern of random, independent invention. This level of coherence points toward a shared, foundational experience, a real event so traumatic it branded itself into the human psyche. The flood myth served a profound purpose for our ancestors. It explained the mysterious, water-scoured landscapes around them. It justified new social and moral orders. And it provided the ultimate metaphor for a clean slate, a world washed clean of its past sins. So what is the common thread connecting the ancient Babylonian Eridu Genesis with the Mayan sacred text, the Popol Vuh? The clues may be far more tangible than the clay tablets they were written on. The evidence might be permanently etched into the geology of our planet, a stone record waiting to be read. A tranquil freshwater lake once existed where the Black Sea lies today, a vast oasis for early farming communities. Their world was about to be erased. The geological record reveals a sudden and catastrophic transformation. Geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman pieced together this ancient disaster, proposing that the land bridge separating this giant lake from the rising Mediterranean Sea gave way. The result was a cataclysmic breach at the Bosporus Strait, a torrent of salt water crashing into the freshwater basin with unimaginable force. This was not a gentle rising of tides. It was a continental-scale waterfall, roaring for months or even years, filling the vast depression. The sea level within the basin may have risen by hundreds of feet, swallowing an area of land the size of Florida almost overnight from a geological perspective. The evidence for this deluge is permanently recorded on the seafloor. Submarine canyons carved by the immense flow of water scar the seabed where the Mediterranean first burst through. Sediment cores tell a silent but dramatic story. layers containing the shells of freshwater mollusks abruptly end, replaced by a new layer filled with the saltwater species we find in the Black Sea today. Radiocarbon dating of these cores, along with the remains of drowned shorelines and riverbeds now far underwater, points to a single, terrifying conclusion. This event likely occurred around 5600 BC. For the people living on those fertile shores, it was the end of their world. Their homes, their fields, everything they knew vanished beneath a rising wall of salt water. Survivors would have fled in every direction, carrying with them a story of a world-devouring flood. This single, localized catastrophe could have sent waves of refugees across Europe and Asia, planting the seed of a global flood memory that would be told and retold for millennia. Could the real Noah's flood have begun here not as a divine punishment, but as a geological event of staggering proportions? The submerged landscape of the Black Sea offers a powerful, tangible clue, but it is not the only one. Our search for the flood's memory leads us to even higher ground. While the Black Sea offers a compelling regional disaster, another far grander process was reshaping coastlines across the entire planet. The end of the last ice age unleashed a global deluge on a scale we can scarcely comprehend. For thousands of years, colossal ice sheets, in some places over 2 miles thick, had locked away vast quantities of the Earth's water. As the world warmed, these frozen giants began to die, releasing a torrent of meltwater back into the oceans. This was not a gentle, steady trickle. It came in devastating surges known to geologists as meltwater pulses. The most dramatic of these, Meltwater Pulse 1A, occurred approximately 14,500 years ago. During this pulse, global sea levels are estimated to have risen by an astonishing 60 feet or more within a span of just a few centuries. Imagine the ocean creeping upward at a rate of several meters every 100 years. This was not a single wave, but a slow, inexorable drowning of the world. For generations of early humans, the sea was a permanent, advancing threat, swallowing their ancestral lands foot by foot, year by year, until entire regions vanished forever. This global flooding was made even more complex by a phenomenon known as isostatic rebound. The immense weight of the ice sheets had literally pressed down on the continents, like a person sitting on a soft mattress. When the ice melted, the land, now freed from its crushing burden, began to slowly rise back up. But this created a terrifying seesaw effect. In areas once covered by ice, like Scandinavia and Canada, the land was rising. Meanwhile, in regions far from the ice, the Earth's crust was tilting downward, causing these areas to sink relative to the sea. For a coastal community in Southeast Asia or the Persian Gulf, this meant a double catastrophe. Not only was the global sea level rising rapidly from the meltwater, but their very land was also sinking, making the encroaching ocean appear even more aggressive and vengeful. Paleoclimatologists can read this ancient drama in the geological record. Core samples drilled from ancient coral reefs and deep ocean sediments act as a precise ledger, layer by layer, recording the timing and speed of these immense sea level changes. The human cost of this global transformation is almost beyond calculation. Vast, fertile continental shelves that had been exposed during the Ice Age, serving as bridges and homelands for our ancestors, were inundated. One of the most significant was Sundaland, a sprawling subcontinent that once connected the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Borneo to mainland Asia. This was not a marginal swamp, but a rich and lightly populated territory almost the size of Europe. As the seas rose, Sundaland was systematically dismantled. Its plains and river valleys flooded, turning peaks into islands and forcing entire populations into a desperate, permanent retreat. The slow creep of the ocean would have been punctuated by sudden, catastrophic collapses as natural dams of ice or sediment gave way. The memory of watching your world drown, of fleeing from a shoreline that never stopped advancing, would have been seared into the collective consciousness of the survivors. This was not one flood, but thousands, happening on every coastline around the world, generation after generation. The relentless ocean became the ultimate villain in humanity's earliest stories, a force that could erase continents and reset the map of the world. This planetary trauma, written in water and stone, provides a profound geological foundation for the flood myths that emerged in its wake. But what if the clues are not just underwater? What if the most enduring evidence of the flood was deliberately placed on the highest mountains, a warning carved in stone for us to find? The oldest written words we have about the flood are not found in the Bible but pressed into Mesopotamian clay. In the royal library of Nineveh, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts the tale of Utnapishtim, a man granted eternal life. His story within a story is the flood account. The god E, troubled by the divine council's decision to wipe out humanity with a great deluge, secretly warns the righteous Utnapishtim. He is given a startlingly precise command. Tear down your house, he is told, and build a massive, waterproof vessel. The instructions are not vague. The ark is to be a perfect cube, 120 cubits in length, width, and height, with 7 decks divided into 9 compartments sealed with bitumen. This is not a simple raft, but the description of a sophisticated, stable, and immense watercraft. An even older text, the Atrahasis epic, provides more context. It speaks of the gods being overwhelmed by the noise of humanity, a divine annoyance that leads to the verdict of annihilation. The storm, when it comes, is described with terrifying power. For 7 days and nights the winds raged, and the flood swept over the land, turning it to mud and wiping away all life. The gods themselves are then portrayed cowering like dogs, weeping at the destruction they unleashed, shocked by the finality of their own actions. Why is this version so mechanically detailed? The setting provides a crucial clue. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was built on fertile soil deposited by frequent, unpredictable floods. A single, catastrophic inundation that overwhelmed their complex irrigation systems and drowned entire city-states would have been a world-ending event for its inhabitants. This regional trauma, seared into cultural memory, could have been universalized over centuries of retelling. The specificity of the ark's design suggests a memory of real nautical technology, a desperate solution to a very real problem. This Mesopotamian blueprint, with its divine warning, technical instructions, and profound moral ambiguity, became the foundational template. But does this template hold when we travel thousands of miles away? Is the story truly universal, or merely a tale that spread from a single source? Across the Atlantic, the Aztecs of Mexico envisioned a cosmos of relentless cycles. Their world was not a one-time creation, but the 5th in a series of successive suns, each one annihilated by a unique disaster. The era immediately preceding our own was the 4th sun, known as Nahui Atl, or Four Water. Its end was not a storm, but a celestial collapse. The sky itself crashed down upon the earth in a deluge of cosmic proportions, a flood so complete it turned the entire world into a single, churning ocean. The water deities were central to this cataclysm. Tlaloc, the great god of rain and fertility, and his consort Chalchutlacu, the goddess of flowing waters, were the agents of this destruction. In this version, the flood was not a punishment for human sin or divine annoyance. It was an inevitable part of a cosmic timetable, a necessary end that made way for a new beginning. This stands in stark contrast to the Mesopotamian narrative, where the gods deliberate and react to human behavior. For the Aztecs, destruction was woven into the fabric of time itself, a cycle as predictable as the seasons. The fate of humanity in this story is both bizarre and poignant. As the heavens fell, Chalchutlicue transformed the people of that age into fish, allowing a form of life to continue within the very element that had destroyed their world. This is a powerful metaphor for survival and adaptation, a belief that life, in some form, always endures even the most absolute endings. The Aztecs even believed that tangible evidence of this lost world remained. They spoke of the bones of giants, the immense beings who lived during the fourth sun, still buried within the earth. This is likely a compelling folk memory, an ancient people's attempt to explain the massive, puzzling fossils of mammoths and mastodons they unearthed. Finding the gigantic skeleton of a prehistoric creature would have seemed like direct physical proof that a race of titans once walked the earth before the Great Flood wiped them out. This cyclical view of history, where worlds are periodically cleansed by water, fire, or wind, challenges the idea of a single, global flood event. It suggests a different kind of memory, one born from a land prone to volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and dramatic climate shifts. The diversity of these flood narratives points not to one story, but to many. Our ancestors around the world may have been recalling different traumatic events, localized cataclysms that felt like the end of their entire universe, each one leaving its own unique scar on the human story. The arid salt flats of Utah stretch out in a vast, silent expanse, a landscape that seems eternally dry. Yet this desert holds the ghost of an ocean. Just 15,000 years ago, a colossal inland sea known as Lake Bonneville covered much of the modern American West. This was not a calm, placid lake. It was a pluvial giant, a body of freshwater fed by prolonged periods of heavy rainfall during the Ice Age. Its shores lapped against mountains that are now islands in the sky, and its depths rivaled the Great Lakes. Then its world broke. The lake's natural containment, a lava rock dam at a place we now call Red Rock Pass, catastrophically failed. What happened next was one of the most powerful floods our planet has ever witnessed. The Bonneville Flood unleashed a torrent of water so immense its power is difficult to grasp. For weeks, a volume of water comparable to the entire flow of the Amazon River thundered out of the collapsing basin. This was not a gentle spillover. It was a catastrophic collapse that carved a new geography in a matter of days. The water ripped across the Snake River plain at ferocious speeds, scouring the bedrock down to its bare bones. It left behind a scarred landscape known as the Channeled Scablands, a region of bizarre, stripped bare rock formations and gigantic dry waterfalls that stand as silent monuments to the flood's violence. One of the most telling pieces of evidence are the massive ripple marks. These are not the gentle ripples you see at a beach. These are towering waves frozen in the earth, some standing 15 meters high and hundreds of meters apart, formed by the incredible force of water moving over the land. For decades, the geologist J. Harlen Bretz was ridiculed for his outrageous theory that a single, colossal flood could explain this terrain. The scientific establishment of his time clung to the doctrine of gradualism, the idea that landscapes were shaped by slow, incremental processes over millions of years. Bretz was insisting on a catastrophe. He was eventually proven right. The evidence on the ground was simply too overwhelming to ignore. This event provides a crucial third geological clue in our search for the flood's memory. It demonstrates that a world-altering deluge does not require a rising ocean. It can happen in the heart of a continent, far from any sea, born from the failure of a single geological feature. The Bonneville Flood is a model for terrestrial catastrophe, and it was not alone. Similar events have been identified across the globe. In the Altai Mountains of Siberia, geological evidence points to another massive glacial lake outburst that ripped through mountain valleys with enough force to move house-sized boulders and reshape entire river systems. For the people living in these regions, an event of this magnitude would have been utterly incomprehensible. One day, a mountain lake exists. The next, a wall of water descends from the highlands, wiping out everything in its path. What story would you tell your children about the day the mountains bled water? How would you explain the canyons torn open in a single season, or the giant ripples in the earth that look like the footsteps of a god? The existence of these inland megafloods dramatically expands the potential sources for our global flood memories. We are no longer looking only at rising sea levels from melting glaciers or a single breached basin like the Black Sea. We are looking at a planet in profound hydraulic turmoil where immense bodies of water held in check by ice or rock were suddenly and violently set free. This means that a culture living deep in a continental interior, people who had never seen the ocean, could still have experienced a flood of biblical proportions. Their story of a world drowned would be just as valid, just as terrifyingly real as any told by a coastal people. The memory was not of one flood, but of many. The earth itself, from its highest mountains to its driest deserts, seems to be whispering the same story of water and wrath. The dimensions given for Noah's Ark are startlingly specific and practical. The Book of Genesis describes a vessel 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. This is not a whimsical shape, but a rectangular barge with a ratio that modern naval architects recognize as remarkably stable in heavy seas. Built from gopher wood and sealed with pitch inside and out, this was a description of a real, seaworthy craft designed for one purpose: survival. The narrative then presents a series of numbers that have been debated for millennia. Rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days, and Noah and his family remained aboard the ark for a full solar year. These are not random figures. In the context of the ancient Near East, the number 40 often signified a period of trial, purification, or profound transition. The total timeline, however, suggests an event of far greater duration than a single storm, pointing toward a prolonged period of catastrophic environmental change. The most famous and most questioned element is the gathering of the animals. The command to bring 2 of every kind, male and female, onto the ark presents immense logistical puzzles. How could 8 people care for, feed, and house what would amount to millions of individual creatures, from insects to elephants? And how could animals from isolated continents, like kangaroos from Australia or sloths from South America, have made the journey to a single point in the Middle East, only to return home again? These questions challenge a literal, global interpretation. Archaeologists and scholars of ancient texts point to a compelling solution. The Genesis account, written down centuries after the Epic of Gilgamesh, shares a common literary and cultural ancestor. The parallels are too striking to ignore: a divine warning, a righteous man, a massive boat, a great flood, and birds sent out to find land. This does not diminish the biblical story, but rather places it within a rich tradition of storytelling, where a core event was retold and refined by different cultures for their own theological purposes. So what are we to make of this foundational tale? Could the whole world that was flooded refer not to the entire planet, but to the entire known world of the ancient writer? For a people living in the vast, flat river basin of Mesopotamia, a catastrophic flood that inundated the entire horizon from end to end would indeed feel like the entire world had been swallowed by water. The story of Noah may preserve the amplified memory of a real, devastating regional flood that obliterated the world as those people knew it. The ark becomes a powerful symbol of salvation, not just from water but from chaos. The carefully recorded dimensions hint at a real nautical technology, a memory of something that was actually built. The gathering of the animals could symbolize the preservation of the domesticated livestock essential to their survival, the restart of a pastoral world. By deconstructing the narrative, we are not dismantling its power. We are searching for its historical nucleus, the traumatic seed from which this towering story grew. This process allows us to look past the theological framework and ask what real event was so catastrophic that it required an explanation of cosmic proportions. If this method can reveal a possible truth within the world's most famous flood story, what might it uncover when we turn to the legends of the other side of the globe? The ocean floor holds entire countries we have forgotten. Beneath the waves off the western coast of India, legends speak of the ancient city of Dwarka, a magnificent capital built by the god Krishna, said to have been consumed by the sea upon his death. Further east, off the coast of Japan, the mysterious terraced stone structures of the Yonaguni Monument rise from the deep, their perfect angles and platforms challenging our understanding of history. Are these the ruins of sunken civilizations or something else entirely? These underwater enigmas point us toward a profound geological reality, the lost landscapes of the last ice age. To understand this, we must first grasp the concept of the continental shelf. Imagine the edges of every continent extending far out underwater, forming a shallow, gently sloping plain. This is the continental shelf, and for most of human history, it was not underwater at all. When the ice sheets locked away vast quantities of seawater, global sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, exposing these shelves as vast, fertile coastal plains. These were not barren wastelands, but rich ecosystems teeming with life, and they were home to our ancestors. The most compelling evidence for this lies not in myth, but in the cold, dark waters of the North Sea. Here, trawlers have for centuries dragged up more than fish. They have pulled up the bones of mammoths, the antlers of giant elk, and finely crafted stone tools from the hands of Mesolithic hunters. This was Deucalion, a sprawling land bridge that connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. It was a vibrant, inhabited world of hills, rivers, and forests, a heartland for human populations for thousands of years. Then, as the world warmed, the sea began its relentless return. First, it was a slow encroachment, turning forests into salt marshes. Then, around 6,200 BC, a catastrophic event likely finished the job. A massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, known as the Storegga Slide, triggered a colossal tsunami that swept across the remaining low-lying plains, delivering a final, devastating blow to this already drowning world. The people of Deucalion were forced into a permanent, desperate retreat, watching their ancestral home vanish forever beneath the waves. The discovery of a human skull, a small brown lump of bone and sediment dredged from the seafloor, confirms it. This was not an empty land, but a lost homeland. While sites like the Yonaguni Formation may ultimately be explained by natural geological processes, their power lies in how they ignite our imagination. They physically represent a universal truth that the world our early ancestors knew is now underwater. Every continent has its own Deucalion, its own sunken plain that was once a thriving habitat. The Persian Gulf was a fertile river valley. The Sahel Shelf connected Australia to New Guinea. The stories of cities like Dwarka or of lost continents like Atlantis are not necessarily records of a single cataclysm. They are the poetic, amplified memories of a global phenomenon, the slow, generational trauma of rising seas that swallowed the very ground beneath our ancestors' feet. These submerged landscapes are the ultimate tangible link, a geological fact that gives a haunting, physical reality to the oldest and most persistent of all human legends. classical world of Greece and Rome echoes with its own watery cataclysm. In the works of the Roman poet Ovid, we find the harrowing tale of Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha. The king of the gods, Zeus, grew so disgusted with the impiety and violence of the Bronze Age race of humans that he resolved to wash the world clean. He unleashed a torrent from the heavens, flooding the entire earth until every landmass vanished and mountaintops became lonely islands. But the Titan Prometheus, ever the friend of humanity, secretly warned his mortal son, Deucalion. Following this divine counsel, Deucalion built a great wooden chest, stocked it with provisions, and rode out the deluge with his wife. Their vessel eventually came to rest on the slopes of Mount Parnassus as the waters receded, leaving them utterly alone in a silent, empty world. The command they received from the gods to repopulate the earth is where this story diverges profoundly from its Near Eastern cousins. They were told to cast the bones of their great mother behind them. In a moment of brilliant interpretation, they understood this to mean the stones of the earth, the bones of Gaia, the mother goddess. The stones Deucalion threw sprang up as men, and those cast by Pyrrha became women, a new, hardier race of humans born directly from the substance of the planet itself. This is not a story of saving animals, but of the literal recreation of humanity from the inanimate earth, a powerful metaphor for a hard reset of civilization. Yet an even older Greek tradition speaks of a flood in the time of King Ogyges, an event so ancient it was considered the marker for the beginning of Athenian history. This primordial deluge was said to have been so vast that it rendered the land uninhabitable for generations. The timing and description of Ogyges' flood have led many scholars to draw a direct line to a specific geological event, the catastrophic breaching of the Bosporus and the flooding of the Black Sea basin. For the people living around the Aegean Sea, the sudden, permanent rise of a neighboring body of water would have been a world-shattering event, a story carried by refugees that then wove itself into the very foundation of Greek identity. These classical traditions show the remarkable flexibility of the flood memory. The core elements are all there: a divine judgment, a warning, a saving vessel, and a remnant of survivors. But the details are uniquely tailored to the local culture and landscape. The Greek mind, fascinated by riddles and the relationship between humanity and the earth, produced a story where people are literally born from stones. The memory of the flood was not a static, fossilized tale, but a living narrative, constantly adapting to explain the world as these ancient people knew it, proving its power across millennia. A wave can become a mountain, and the sea can climb onto the land. The fifth geological clue in our search for the flood's memory is the most sudden and violent of all, the Mega-Tsunami. For a coastal community, a tsunami is the ocean itself turning vengeful, a wall of water that appears without warning to scour the coastline clean. This fits the narrative of many flood myths far more closely than a slow, creeping sea level rise. It is a single, terrifying event that arrives, destroys, and then recedes, leaving a shattered world behind. The geological evidence for such cataclysms is written in the earth, and some of it points to a cause far more dramatic than an earthquake, an impact from the cosmos. One of the most compelling and controversial hypotheses suggests that a comet struck or exploded over the North American ice sheet around 12,800 years ago. This proposed Comet Clovis event is thought by some scientists to have triggered a sudden return to Ice Age conditions, a period known as the Younger Dryas. The evidence they point to is a thin, dark layer in the soil from that time, a layer rich in unusual materials like nanodiamonds, tiny magnetic spheres, and high concentrations of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids and comets. The force of such an impact, especially if it struck the ocean, would have been unimaginable. it would have instantly vaporized billions of gallons of seawater, sending a series of mega-tsunamis hundreds of meters high racing across the globe, crashing thousands of miles inland. On the Atlantic coastal plain of the United States, the landscape is dotted with hundreds of thousands of strange, elliptical depressions known as the Carolina Bays. These shallow, sandy basins are all aligned in the same northwest to southeast direction. For decades, their origin has been a puzzle. While many geologists now believe they were formed by wind and water processes over millennia, a persistent theory suggests they are the scars of a cosmic event. The idea is that a fragmented comet entered the atmosphere at a low angle, and the resulting swarm of airbursts, like a shotgun blast from the sky, gouged out these vast depressions and set the continent on fire. Whether from an impact or another cause, geologists have also uncovered undeniable proof of colossal tsunamis from our past. In the Mediterranean, sediment cores and massive boulders carried far inland tell of a wave that scoured the coastline following the eruption of the Santorini volcano. In the South Pacific, similar deposits speak of waves that overwhelmed islands, leaving behind a layer of ocean sand and coral fragments in places where the sea should never reach. A tsunami is a flood story in its purest form, a single, horrifying day of judgment from the sea. For the survivors, the world they knew was simply gone, erased by a force that seemed both personal and utterly alien. How could such an event be explained except as an act of divine wrath? The sudden darkness, the shaking earth, and then the mountain of water arriving with a roar would have felt like the gods themselves were unleashing their fury. This introduces a final, dramatic layer to our geological detective work, a mechanism of destruction so swift and absolute that it could have seared itself into human memory on multiple continents, becoming the ultimate story of a world cleansed by water. The great ocean holds its own chronicle of the flood. For the seafaring peoples of the Pacific, the waves were not just a threat, they were the very fabric of their world, a world they knew was capable of vanishing beneath the surface. In the Hawaiian tradition, the god Cain, the creator of life, once grew so angered by humanity's failings that he broke the great calabash of the sea, unleashing a deluge that drowned the entire earth, leaving only the highest mountain peaks exposed. Far to the south, the Maori of Aotearoa tell of Parawenuemia, the female essence of floodwaters, whose arrival from the sea can overwhelm the land in a sudden, violent embrace. These are not abstract tales of divine punishment. They are survival manuals encoded in myth. The unique power of these oceanic flood stories lies in their deep connection to navigation and the creation of new land. For a people who found their way across thousands of miles of open water by reading stars, currents, and the flight of birds, a change in sea level was not a theoretical concept. It was a direct and immediate danger. A slight rise in the ocean could erase the low-lying atolls that served as vital wayfinding markers, turning a familiar seascape into an impassable, featureless blue desert. These myths may hold the memory of that precise trauma, the slow, relentless drowning of ancestral homelands and vital coastlines over generations. The threat was not always gradual. The Pacific Ring of Fire is a geologically violent place where volcanic eruptions and massive submarine landslides can generate tsunamis of terrifying scale. A legend of a goddess like Parawenuemia rising from the deep could perfectly describe the sudden, inexplicable arrival of such a wave, scouring coastal villages without warning. This duality is captured beautifully in the Cumulipo, the great Hawaiian creation chant. It describes a world born from the endless, dark sea, a slow, poetic emergence of life from the depths. This is more than just metaphor. It is a stunningly accurate reflection of the geological reality of the Pacific itself, where volcanic islands are literally born from the ocean floor, rising through fire and water to become new land. For the Polynesian voyagers, the flood was not a one-time event that ended a world. It was an ongoing cycle of destruction and creation, of islands lost and islands found. Their stories of floods were intrinsically linked to their greatest skill, their incredible ability to navigate, to find new homes when the old ones were taken by the sea. This transforms their flood memory from a tale of punishment into a testament of resilience, a central pillar of their identity that equipped them to face a changing world with courage and purpose. Their legends taught them that the ocean could give as easily as it could take away, a profound understanding written in the stars and whispered on the waves. Eastern Washington State holds a landscape that defies belief, a geological crime scene so vast it rewrote the rules of earth science. This is the Channeled Scablands, a stark, scarred territory of dry canyons and bizarre rock formations stretching for hundreds of miles. For decades, the scientific establishment dismissed this terrain as the product of slow, patient erosion. But one geologist, J. Harlen Bretz, dared to see something else, a story of sudden, apocalyptic violence written across the basalt plains. He proposed a heresy that the Scablands were not carved over millions of years, but in a matter of days by a catastrophic flood of unimaginable power. His colleagues ridiculed him. They were committed to gradualism, the doctrine that the Earth's features were shaped by the slow, steady processes we see today. Bretz was insisting on a catastrophe, and the landscape itself was his evidence. The proof is etched into the very bones of the land. There are the immense coulees, dry river canyons with sheer walls that were clearly torn open by a colossal, rushing force. There are gravel bars, but not the kind you find along a gentle river. These are towering mounds of rock and sediment, some hundreds of feet high, deposited where the torrent slowed and dropped its immense load of debris. Most telling of all are the ripple marks. These are not the small ridges you see in the sand. They are gigantic waves frozen in the earth, some standing 15 meters high and hundreds of meters apart. You cannot see their full form from the ground. Only from the air does their true scale become apparent, the ghostly imprint of a raging current that must have moved at 60 miles per hour. So where did all this water come from? The source was Glacial Lake Missoula, a gigantic inland sea held back by a towering dam of ice in the Rocky Mountains. When that ice dam failed, it did not just leak, it collapsed. The release was like pulling the plug from a continent-sized bathtub. A wall of water hundreds of feet high exploded across the landscape, scouring the bedrock down to its bare bones, stripping away the soil and carving the strange, channeled terrain we see today. And this did not happen just once. Geological evidence suggests the ice dam reformed and collapsed repeatedly over centuries, each failure unleashing another world-altering deluge upon the land. The existence of the Scablands is our sixth and perhaps most definitive geological clue. It proves beyond any doubt that catastrophic, biblical-scale flooding is a real geological process. This is not a theoretical model, it is a fact written in stone. It provides a powerful, tangible analog for the kind of forces that could have inspired ancient flood myths. For the people living downstream from such an event, witnessing a wall of water tear canyons into solid rock and rearrange the very hills, it would have felt like the gods themselves were remaking the world. The story of the Channeled Scablands gives us permission to take the flood myth seriously, not as mere allegory, but as potential eyewitness accounts to a planet in the throes of geological chaos. A small fish swims into the hands of a sage, and the fate of the world is rewritten. In the ancient Sanskrit texts of the Satapatha Brahmana, the first man, Manu, is performing his ablutions when he finds a tiny fish pleading for protection. He places it in a jar, but the fish grows with astonishing speed, outgrowing the jar, then a pond, then the mighty Ganges River itself. Finally, it must be released into the ocean, and it is there the fish reveals its true nature. It is the Matsya avatar, the first earthly incarnation of the great preserver god, Vishnu. This is not a story of divine anger. The flood that is coming, the sage is told, is a pralaya, a great dissolution. It is not a punishment for sin, but a necessary, scheduled event in the endless cosmic cycle of creation and destruction. The universe must periodically sleep so it can be born again. The divine fish provides not just a warning but a precise survival plan. Monu is to build a massive, sturdy ship. When the waters rise, he is to bring aboard the seeds of every plant and a pair of every living creature. As the deluge engulfs the world, the ship will be tossed on the furious waves, but Monu is instructed to tie his vessel to the single horn now growing from the gigantic fish's head. Vishnu, in this piscine form, becomes an active physical guide, towing the ark through the watery chaos to safety on the peak of a mountain, ensuring life itself continues. This narrative carries a profound thematic difference. The focus is not on wiping the slate clean of a flawed humanity, but on the deliberate, merciful preservation of biological continuity. Manus Ark is a floating gene bank, a lifeboat for the entire ecosystem. The survival of the world depends on this one man following the instructions of a god who has chosen to become part of the very element of destruction. This motif of a fish god savior is strikingly familiar. Centuries before the Matsya legend was written down, the Mesopotamians spoke of Ons, a being with the body of a fish and the head of a man who emerged from the Erythraean Sea. This Ons was not a destroyer but a civilizing hero who taught humanity the foundations of law, agriculture, and architecture. The parallels are too compelling to ignore. Could the idea of a piscine deity, a guide from the deep, have traveled the ancient trade routes that connected the Indus Valley to the kingdoms of Mesopotamia? This suggests a web of shared stories, a cultural current flowing across continents, with each civilization adapting the core idea to fit its own unique worldview. For the Hindu tradition, the flood was not an anomaly. It was a guaranteed, cyclical reset button built into the machinery of the cosmos. The legend of Monu and the fish provides a different philosophical lens through which to view our global flood memory. It transforms the cataclysm from a terrifying act of wrath into a solemn, natural process, where the divine intervenes not to punish, but to gently steer the ship of life through the necessary darkness, ensuring the dawn of a new age. The silent pages of this planetary history are not made of paper, but of mud and ice. The great river deltas of the world are our archives, sprawling libraries built from layer upon layer of sediment carried from distant highlands. The Mississippi Delta, the Nile, the Yangtze, each is an immense slow-motion recording of everything that has happened upstream for thousands of years. To read these books, we must learn their language. The methodology is called coring. Imagine pushing a long, hollow tube deep into the soft, accumulated layers of a delta or into the ancient ice of Greenland. When you pull it back up, you have extracted a long, cylindrical core sample, a vertical timeline of the past. Each distinct layer in that core is a chapter, preserving a moment in time, waiting to tell its story. What stories do these muddy timelines tell? They reveal episodes of catastrophic flooding with stunning clarity. A core sample from a peaceful-looking floodplain might show a thick, coarse layer of gravel and sand suddenly sandwiched between finer, older silt. This is the unmistakable signature of a monumental flood event, a deluge powerful enough to carry heavy debris far from its normal course and deposit it in a single, violent pulse. In ice cores drilled from the world's glaciers, the record is even more precise. The ice itself forms annual layers like tree rings, trapping within it tiny bubbles of the ancient atmosphere and fine dust from volcanic eruptions or distant deserts. A single dark band of ash in an ice core can be chemically linked to a specific volcanic explosion that darkened the skies and triggered global cooling. A rapid shift in the chemistry of the ice, or in the gases trapped within its bubbles, signals a dramatic and swift change in the planet's climate. These silent, layered records provide an objective, year-by-year account of planetary history, a timeline against which we can compare the stories told by our ancestors. For instance, a sediment core drilled from the bottom of the Black Sea shows a sudden, dramatic transition. The lower layers are composed of dark, organic, rich mud filled with the shells of freshwater snails. Then, in a geological instant, that layer ends. Above it lies a completely different type of sediment, a lighter, silty mud containing the shells of saltwater organisms. This is the physical proof of the Bosporus breach, the moment the Mediterranean crashed in, permanently changing the lake into a sea. The ice cores from Greenland tell a parallel story of chaos. They record the onset of the Younger Dryas period, a time when the world, which had been warming steadily, was suddenly and violently thrown back into a miniature ice age for over 1,000 years. The cause is still debated, but the effect is undeniable in the ice, a climate shock that would have disrupted weather patterns and civilizations across the globe. This is the power of the seventh geological clue. It gives us a way to test the flood myths against hard data. We can ask if the proposed timing of a great deluge in human memory, whether 5,000 years ago or 12,000, aligns with a period of profound climatic instability recorded in the mud and ice. The answer appears to be a resounding yes. The cores reveal a planet emerging from the last ice age not as a smooth, steady process, but as a violent, convulsive struggle, punctuated by floods, volcanic winters, and rapid sea level rise. Our ancestors were not telling stories about a single flood. They were likely describing the feeling of living through an entire age of water-driven chaos, an epoch where the very foundations of their world seemed to be dissolving. These layered records in the Earth offer the closest thing we have to a global fact check, and they suggest that the memory of the flood is not a myth at all, but a deeply encoded geological truth. A different kind of hero faced the deluge in ancient China. There was no ark, no gathering of animals, and no waiting for the waters to recede. Instead, the story of the Great Yu is one of relentless, back-breaking labor. For generations, a catastrophic flood was said to have inundated the land, a relentless disaster that no prayer could quell. The classic of history tells us that Yu's own father was tasked with controlling the waters, but he failed, attempting to block the floods with dams that only worsened the catastrophe. Yu was given the same impossible mission, but he chose a radically different path. He did not fight the water, he guided it. For 13 long years, he led a monumental effort to dredge new river channels and carve out canals, directing the floodwaters toward the sea. He is portrayed as so dedicated to his task that he passed his own home 3 times without stepping inside, his body weathered and deformed by the ceaseless toil. His success did not just save the people, it earned him the mandate of heaven, the divine right to establish China's legendary first dynasty, the Xia. This is not a story of escape but of transformation. The hero does not flee the cataclysm, he conquers it through engineering and sheer human will, turning a force of chaos into the foundation of civilization itself. What could have inspired such a distinct narrative? The answer likely flows through the very heart of China, the Yellow River. Known as China's sorrow, this river has flooded catastrophically throughout history, its silt-laden waters bursting their banks and reshaping the landscape. The myth of the Great reads like a cultural memory of the first massive state-organized water management projects. It commemorates the moment humanity shifted from being passive victims of nature to active shapers of their environment. This practical hydrological interpretation shows how the same type of global memory, a great flood, can be molded by a culture's unique relationship with its world. Where some societies remembered a god who commanded a boat, the Chinese remembered an engineer king who built a nation with a shovel. The memory of the water remains, but the lesson is entirely their own. The continental shelf off Norway holds the scar of one of the most violent events in our planet's recent history. Around 6,200 BC, a colossal section of the seabed, an area the size of Iceland, simply gave way. This was the Storegga Slide, a catastrophic submarine landslide that sent thousands of cubic kilometers of sediment crashing into the deep ocean. The displacement of such an immense volume of water would have been instantaneous and devastating. It generated a mega-tsunami, a wave that radiated out across the North Sea. By the time it reached the coastlines of Scotland, Norway, and Denmark, this wave was not a simple swell. It was a wall of water estimated to have been over 20 meters high, thundering inland with the force of a geological hammer. Geologists have pieced together this ancient disaster through seabed mapping and sediment cores. The chaotic, slumped terrain on the ocean floor marks the landslide source, a vast amphitheater of collapse. But the most telling evidence is found far from the slide itself, preserved in the coastal plains that were in its path. Core samples taken from these areas reveal a sudden, violent layer of sand and marine shells deposited deep inland, a stark interruption in the usual, gentle layers of peat and silt. This sand layer is the tsunami's calling card, a permanent record of the moment the ocean rushed miles onto the land. The human impact of this event is no longer just theoretical. On the coast of Northumberland in England, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Mesolithic settlement at Howick. This was a sophisticated dwelling, a round house occupied by hunter-gatherers who harvested the rich resources of the coast. Then, around the time of the Storegga Slide, the site was abruptly abandoned. The evidence suggests a sudden, catastrophic inundation, a disaster that forced the people to flee and never return. For the communities living along those ancient shores, this was not a slow rising tide. It was a single, terrifying day when the sea rose up without warning to reclaim the land. The story of that day, of the water that came from nowhere to destroy their homes, would have been told and retold for generations. It was a localized event, but for the people who lived through it, it was their entire world that was flooded. This provides our eighth geological clue, a stark reminder that the raw material for legend does not require a global catastrophe. It only requires an event so traumatic that its echo never fades. The oldest stories on Earth are written not in clay but in memory. For over 65,000 years, Aboriginal Australians have maintained an unbroken oral tradition, a living library of the land. Woven into the very fabric of the Dreamtime, the sacred epoch of creation, are powerful narratives of the sea's relentless advance. The Gunditjmara people of Victoria tell of a time when the sea rose to engulf the coastal plain, transforming their ancestral lands into the stormy waters of the Southern Ocean. Far to the west, the Ungarangeri people describe the drowning of their country, a vast, fertile plain that now lies beneath the waves off the coast of South Australia. These are not tales of a single, worldwide deluge sent by an angry god. They are specific, local, and hauntingly precise chronicles of environmental change. The narratives often name islands that are no longer islands, describe river courses that now end at cliffs overlooking the open sea, and detail animal migrations that would be impossible across the water-filled landscapes of today. This geographical accuracy is what makes these stories so startling. They recall a world map that has not existed for millennia. When the last ice age locked away the planet's water, the Australian coastline extended hundreds of kilometers further out. The continental shelf, a vast plain known as Sahul, connected the mainland to New Guinea and Tasmania. As the glaciers melted, the sea crept back in, drowning this sunken world over the course of generations. The stories told by the first Australians match this geological process with an almost map-like fidelity. Can a story truly hold its shape for 10,000 years? The correlation between these ancient Dreamtime narratives and the known geological history of the continent suggests a profound yes. This is not myth in the sense of fiction. It is a form of historical record, a deeply encoded memory of a lost geography passed with meticulous care from one generation to the next. It means that our earliest flood stories may not be about divine punishment at all, but about a real, witnessed event, the slow, unstoppable drowning of a world remembered in song and ceremony. If these oral traditions can preserve the shape of a coastline for 100 centuries, what other ancient truths might they be keeping for us? The world's coastlines are fringed with the ghosts of drowned landscapes. From the sprawling Chesapeake Bay to the deeply indented shores of Cornwall and Brittany, these winding inlets are not random features. They are drowned river valleys or Rias, ancient waterways that once flowed through lush, inhabited land. When the great ice sheets melted, the rising ocean did not just advance over flat plains, it crept steadily inland, flooding up the very mouths of these river systems. Saltwater pushed silently into freshwater valleys, transforming them into the estuaries and bays we navigate today. Modern sonar mapping reveals the truth with stunning clarity. The seafloor along these coasts is not a smooth, blank slate. It is etched with the unmistakable, ghostly outlines of forgotten riverbeds, complete with their tributaries and submerged floodplains, a sunken geography hidden just beneath the waves. For the prehistoric communities living along those rivers, this was not a sudden catastrophe but a slow, generational crisis. Imagine a family returning to a familiar fishing spot year after year, only to find the freshwater gradually turning brackish, the reeds dying back, the fish they relied on disappearing. Their hunting grounds along the riverbanks would have slowly shrunk, claimed by the encroaching salt marsh. The very source of their drinking water would have been poisoned by the relentless inland creep of the sea. This was a disaster without a single storm or wave, a theft of their world conducted so slowly that no one alive could remember the beginning. The trauma of this slow flood would have been profound, a permanent, low-grade anxiety passed from parent to child as the familiar map of their world was irrevocably redrawn by an unstoppable force. While it lacks the biblical drama of a tsunami, this gradual displacement and loss could have seeded a deep, persistent memory of a world being taken by water, a different kind of deluge whose story was written not in a single day of terror, but in the quiet, rising salinity of a river. One of the oldest written histories in the world presents us with a breathtaking puzzle. The Sumerian king list, inscribed on cracked clay tablets, records the rulers of ancient Mesopotamia, but it does so with a bizarre and fascinating twist. The kings who reigned before the Great Flood are said to have governed for periods that defy belief, stretching for tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. Then the flood sweeps over the land and everything changes. The list presents this deluge as a stark, historical dividing line. After the waters recede, the reigns of the kings suddenly become much shorter, measured in centuries and then decades, figures that begin to sound almost human. This dramatic shift is the document's central clue. Why would the ancient scribes make such a sharp distinction? It suggests the flood was not just a story to them, but a genuine turning point, a cataclysm so profound it reset the very nature of civilization and kingship. So how do we interpret those impossibly long rains? One compelling theory is that these vast numbers did not represent the life of a single person, but the duration of an entire dynasty or the supremacy of a particular city-state. The king's name might have been a symbol for his royal house and his legendary reign the accumulated years of its rule. Another possibility is that this was a powerful political tool. By claiming a lineage that stretched back into a mythical age of superhuman, divinely touched rulers, a later king could cement his own legitimacy and authority, grounding his right to rule in a time when gods walked the earth. The flood, in this context, becomes the event that ended that golden age, separating the era of the gods from the age of men. The very fact that this foundational document blends what we see as myth with what it presents as history is perhaps its most important message. For the Sumerians, the flood was not a legend, it was a fact, the pivotal event that defined their past and shaped their identity. This conceptual chasm between the world before the water and the world after it is a divide we find echoed in the very structure of human memory itself. A thin, black line in the earth separates two worlds, found at archaeological sites from North America to Europe and into the Middle East. This dark layer of sediment, dating to around 12,800 years ago, acts as a stark boundary in time. Below it, evidence of ancient cultures and thriving megafauna. Above it, a silent, altered planet. This is the heart of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, one of the most contentious scientific ideas of our time. Proponents argue this line is the soot and fallout from a cosmic catastrophe, the debris of a fragmented comet that struck or exploded in our atmosphere. The evidence they point to is exotic and compelling. Embedded within this layer are microscopic nanodiamonds, forged only under immense pressure, and tiny magnetic spheres rich in iron and nickel. Most telling are the spikes in platinum and iridium, elements rare on Earth's surface but abundant in asteroids and comets. These materials form a global fingerprint, a potential smoking gun for an event of extraterrestrial violence. The proposed consequences of such an impact are almost biblical in scale. The heat from the fireballs would have ignited wildfires across continents, scorching millions of acres. Soot and dust blasted into the upper atmosphere would have shrouded the globe, blocking the sun's warmth and plunging the planet back into a deep freeze for over 1,000 years, a period we call the Younger Dryas. This sudden climate shock provides a potential explanation for two of prehistory's greatest mysteries. In North America, the sophisticated Clovis culture, known for their distinctive stone spear points, vanished almost overnight. At the same time, dozens of species of megafauna, from the mighty mammoth to the giant ground sloth, were abruptly driven to extinction. They could not survive the rapid shift from a warming world to an ice age. The flooding implications are equally dramatic. The immense heat from the impact could have rapidly destabilized the remaining ice sheets, triggering catastrophic meltwater pulses that would have sent colossal volumes of water pouring into the oceans. The impact itself, if it struck the ice, would have instantly vaporized trillions of gallons, sending mega-tsunamis hundreds of meters high racing across the globe. For human populations living through this, it would have felt like the end of days. First, a terrifying light in the sky, followed by a rain of fire. Then a long, dark winter fell, killing plants and game. As the cold persisted, the very ground would have shaken with glacial collapse, and the coasts would have been scoured by tsunamis of unimaginable force. The world they knew was attacked from the sky, the land, and the sea simultaneously. it is crucial to note that this hypothesis remains fiercely debated. Many scientists question the global nature of the evidence, suggesting these materials could have alternative terrestrial origins. Yet, even with its controversies, the theory represents a bold attempt to find a single, unifying trigger for the disparate threads of catastrophe that run through our ancient past. It offers a potential scenario so globally traumatic, so universally terrifying, that the memory of fire from the heavens and water from the abyss could have been seared into the human story, echoing for millennia in our oldest and most widespread legends. These stories are far more than ancient news reports. They represent humanity's first, deepest struggle to answer a question that still haunts us today. Why do terrible things happen? The flood myths served as a powerful form of Theodicy, an attempt to reconcile the existence of a benevolent divine power with the reality of indiscriminate suffering. In this framework, the catastrophe was not random. It was a deliberate act of divine judgment, a necessary purge of a corrupt or noisy humanity that had strayed from its purpose. The survival of a single righteous family was the ultimate message of hope, a sign that moral order could be restored and that humanity was worth a second chance. This narrative transforms a senseless disaster into a story with a moral lesson, a painful but purposeful reset that established a new covenant between the cleansed world and its creators. Water itself is the key symbol in this cosmic drama. Across countless creation myths, the world begins as a formless, chaotic sea. The first act of creation is often the god or gods pushing back these primordial waters, imposing land, sky, and order upon the abyss. The Great Flood, then, is the terrifying return of that chaos. It is the universe threatening to revert to its primeval, liquid state, swallowing the hard-won order of civilization. The flood hero, whether Noah or Manu or Deucalion, does not just survive a storm. He reenacts the original work of the gods, becoming a partner in a second creation, helping to re-establish order from the watery void. This gives the story a profound cosmological significance, framing human virtue as essential to maintaining the very structure of reality. From a more secular viewpoint, these tales reveal a primal and enduring human anxiety. They are a testament to our profound vulnerability in the face of a planet that can, without warning, erase everything we have built. Our ancestors looked out at canyons carved by impossible forces and shorelines that had marched inland for generations, and they crafted stories to explain the terrifying power behind those changes. The flood myth is at its heart a story of resilience. It is about the unyielding will to survive, to cling to a tiny vessel in a vast ocean, and to believe in a future when all visible evidence suggests there is none. These narratives are a fundamental act of meaning-making, transforming trauma into a cornerstone of cultural identity. The persistence of this memory across hundreds of cultures forces us to ask what is so essential to the human experience that it had to be remembered forever. It seems the need to find purpose in catastrophe, to assert order over chaos, and to believe in renewal after absolute loss, is woven into the very fabric of who we are. Tropical coral reefs hold a silent, stony chronicle of the ocean's ancient movements. These vibrant underwater cities are far more than just ecosystems. They are living recorders, their very skeletons forming a precise ledger of the sea's rise and fall. To understand their language, we must first understand how a coral lives. A coral polyp, that tiny, soft-bodied animal, cannot survive in the dark abyss. It depends on a partnership with sunlight-hungry algae. This means coral reefs can only build their limestone structures in the shallow, sunlit zones near the ocean's surface. This simple fact is the key to everything. When global sea levels begin to climb, the water deepens over the reef. to avoid being left in the dark and dying, the entire coral community responds in the only way it can. It grows vertically, reaching upward toward the life-giving sun. It races to keep its head in the light, but when sea levels pause or fall, the upward chase stops. With the water depth now stable, the coral can focus its energy on expanding outward, colonizing the new, shallow seafloor and creating vast, flat platforms. Over millennia, this cycle of rising and stable seas constructs a series of giant underwater steps, coral terraces descending into the deep, each flat step marking a period when the ocean held its breath. Scientists read these submerged staircases in places like Barbados and Papua New Guinea, where tectonic forces are slowly lifting these ancient reefs from the sea, bringing their history into clearer view. By drilling cores into these fossil terraces and using precise radioactive dating methods on the coral rock itself, they can assign an age to each step. The result is not a smooth, sloping line, but a jagged graph of violent change. The data reveals sudden, terrifying surges where the ocean climbed several meters in a single century, followed by long, quiet plateaus. One of the most dramatic of these surges is the same event we find in the ocean sediments, Meltwater Pulse 1A. The coral record confirms it, a vertical explosion of growth around 14,500 years ago as the reefs desperately scrambled to escape the drowning of their own world. For a human community living along a coastline, a sea level jump of that speed would not be a slow creep. It would be a relentless invasion, a tangible crisis witnessed within a few human lifetimes. You would not need to be a scientist to see the water claiming your land, season after season, year after year. This biological testimony from the corals provides our 11th geological clue, a powerful, independent verification of the planetary chaos recorded in the mud and ice. The reefs tell the same story as the sediment cores from the ocean floor and the air bubbles trapped in Greenland's glaciers. They all point to the same conclusion. The end of the Ice Age was a convulsive, unstable period where the ocean advanced in fits and starts. This multi-pronged evidence transforms the idea of a great flood from a single event into an entire era of hydraulic trauma. The coral terraces stand as a silent, stony witness to the very real, persistent threat that shaped the deepest memories of our species, a time when the shore itself was a fleeting and dangerous place to be. So we are left with a planet covered in water stains and a human race that tells the same story from every corner of the globe. Having gathered these clues from the deep seabed to the highest mountain, we face the ultimate puzzle. Can we assemble them into a single, unified picture? The central question is starkly simple. Was there one global flood, a singular cataclysm that drowned the entire world? Or are we hearing the echoes of countless local disasters, each one so traumatic it felt like the end of everything? The Black Sea Deluge theory offers a compelling and contained answer. A single, dramatic breach at the Bosporus provides a perfect, localized source for the flood myths of the Near East and the Mediterranean. Its strength is its specificity, a real event with a clear date that matches the archaeological timeline for the spread of farming cultures into Europe. But its weakness is its scope. It cannot by itself explain the flood memories of the Aztecs in Mexico or the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. It is a powerful seed, but not the entire forest. Then we have the slow, inexorable creep of post-glacial sea level rise. This was a truly global phenomenon, a drowning that played out on every coastline for thousands of years. Its strength is its universality. Every coastal culture on Earth would have witnessed this relentless advance generation after generation, watching their ancestral lands vanish. This explains the sheer geographic spread of the stories, but its weakness is its pace. does a slow, creeping sea, rising over centuries, inspire the dramatic, week-long storms and world-engulfing waves described in so many myths? Perhaps not on its own. This is where the high-energy, short-duration catastrophes complete the picture. The Storegga Tsunami, the mega-floods from glacial lakes like Missoula, or even a potential cosmic impact, deliver the sudden, apocalyptic violence that the myths describe with such terrifying clarity. A tsunami is a perfect analog for a divine punishment, arriving without warning and scouring the land clean in a single day. These events provide the raw, emotional terror that would sear itself into legend. Yet they are, by their nature, regional. A tsunami in the North Sea does not flood the Andes. The most coherent answer, then, is not a choice between these ideas, but a synthesis of them all. The global flood memory is likely a composite, a powerful narrative archetype that our ancestors used to make sense of water-based trauma in all its forms. A single culture might have experienced the slow drowning of its coastline for generations, only to have that generational anxiety crystallized by a single, horrific tsunami. The story that resulted would blend the slow creep and the sudden wave into one divine event. The human mind, seeking patterns and meaning, would naturally compress these complex, long-term traumas into a simpler, more dramatic story of a world made new. This narrative template, the story of a world cleansed by water and a righteous remnant saved, proved incredibly versatile and resilient. It was a tool for making sense of the senseless. Whether the water came from a breached strait, a melting glacier, or a wave from the heavens, the universal human response was the same: to tell a story about it. We transformed geological events into moral lessons, physical chaos into cosmic order. The flood was not one story, but thousands, each a unique reflection of a local catastrophe, yet all united by the same profound human need to find a warning and a promise of renewal in the heart of the deluge. The human voice can be a time capsule, carrying memories across centuries with stunning precision. How could a story survive for 10,000 years without a single written word? The answer lies in the sophisticated machinery of oral tradition, a system of cultural transmission far more robust than we often imagine. This was not a simple game of telephone where details blur and distort with each telling. For pre-literate societies, preserving foundational knowledge was a matter of survival, and they developed powerful techniques to ensure critical information passed intact from one generation to the next. The most vital stories were not merely spoken, they were encoded into rhythmic poetry and set to music. The beat of a drum, the melody of a chant, and the precise structure of a narrative formula acted as a mnemonic device, locking key details into a fixed and unforgettable sequence. Dance and ritual performance provided a physical dimension to the memory, engaging the entire body in the act of remembrance. This created a multi-sensory package, making the story as difficult to forget as the lyrics of a beloved song. Studies of modern oral cultures, from the griots of West Africa to the epic singers of the Balkans, demonstrate this incredible fidelity. In a stable cultural context where elders rigorously train the next generation and the community collectively safeguards its heritage, core narratives can remain essentially unchanged for millennia. The Aboriginal Australian flood stories we encountered earlier are the ultimate testament to this power. These are not vague legends, but specific accounts of coastal inundation that align with known sea level rise from 10,000 years ago. This level of geographical accuracy was only possible because the story was treated as a sacred trust, a map of a lost world recited with ritual precision. A foundational life and death story like the Great Flood would have been the crown jewel of this oral archive. It was not casual entertainment, but a crucial lesson about the planet's power, the fragility of human existence and the necessity of virtue. Recited during ceremonies and passed from master to apprentice, the narrative became a living, breathing heirloom. The story itself became the vessel, carrying the essence of a real, traumatic event safely across an ocean of time, long after the waters themselves had receded. Deep beneath the earth, in the perpetual dark of the world's caves, another silent witness keeps its own meticulous record. Stalactites hang like stone icicles from cavern ceilings, while stalagmites rise from the floor to meet them, all formed over millennia by the slow, patient drip of water. These speleothems, as they are known, are far more than geological decorations. They are intricate paleoclimate archives chronicling the world above in layers of mineral deposit. The very water that builds them carries a chemical signature from the surface, a fingerprint of the temperature and rainfall at the moment it seeped through the rock. When scientists slice a stalagmite open, they reveal a cross-section of concentric rings, a timeline of growth as readable as the rings of an ancient tree. Each band's thickness and chemical composition tells a story. A period of abundant, heavy rainfall results in a thick, rapidly formed layer as water saturated with minerals drips steadily into the cave. Conversely, a long drought leaves behind only a thin, hesitant line or sometimes no growth at all. This is where the 12th geological clue reveals itself. By analyzing the precise ratios of different oxygen atoms locked within the calcite, researchers can reconstruct a high-resolution history of the atmosphere's temperature and the intensity of precipitation, stretching back tens of thousands of years. Evidence from caves in China and the Middle East has identified dramatic climatic shifts, pinpointing eras of mega-droughts that starved civilizations and, crucially, periods of mega-rainfalls that would have unleashed catastrophic, sustained flooding. One such event, a sudden and intense return to wet conditions at the end of the frigid Younger Dryas period around 11,500 years ago, is clearly recorded in stalagmites from across the globe. This was not a single storm, but a fundamental reorganization of the planet's weather patterns, a deluge that may have lasted for generations. Imagine the impact of such a change. Rivers would have swelled beyond recognition, bursting their banks for years on end. Low-lying plains would have transformed into permanent marshland, and seasonal streams into raging torrents. For the people living through it, this would have been a flood without end, a world where the sky seemed to have torn open. The cave formations provide a crucial, independent line of evidence, one that comes not from the ocean floor or a glacier, but from the very bedrock beneath our feet. They help us build a three-dimensional picture of a planet in the throes of a violent hydraulic transition, where the climate itself seemed to have turned against humanity, leaving its testimony in the slow, steady drip of water in the dark. From the depths of the Black Sea to the peaks of Ararat, a single haunting memory echoes across time. Our journey through the global flood reveals a stunning convergence, a place where the lines between ancient myth and hard geological fact begin to blur into a single, profound truth. These stories were never mere fantasy. They are the deeply encoded memories of a world in traumatic transition, a planet emerging from the Ice Age not with a gentle thaw, but with violent hydraulic convulsions. We have stood on the scarred plains of the Channeled Scablands, walked the sunken coastlines of Deucalion, and read the layered testimony of ice and coral. The clues are undeniable. Rising seas swallowed entire continents over generations. Catastrophic tsunamis scoured coastlines in a single day. Immense ice dams failed, unleashing inland oceans. And the very climate itself may have been shocked by an impact from the cosmos. Our ancestors lived through an age of water-driven chaos, and the stories they told were their way of making sense of a world that seemed to be dissolving around them. These flood myths are humanity's first great attempt to answer a fundamental question. Why do terrible things happen? They transformed senseless disaster into a narrative of moral order, a divine reset that punished the corrupt but saved a righteous remnant. This was not just a story about survival, but about the resilience of the human spirit and our unyielding drive to find purpose and hope even in the face of absolute loss. The next time you hear an old tale of a great deluge, listen closely. You are not hearing a fairy tale. You are hearing one of humanity's oldest and most profound history lessons, a memory of water and resilience passed down for thousands of years, reminding us of our fragility, our strength, and our deep, enduring connection to a volatile planet. We would love to hear your thoughts on this fascinating intersection of science and story in the comments below. And if you want to join us on more journeys into the mysteries of our past, be sure to